Hello, everybody. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. We have Clayton's accuser's lawyer responding to Clayton's crazy cult, as he called them. The Justice for Clayton page, the different groups that exist that have been there to provide Clayton, I guess, the platform to fight the accusations he's fighting, which is that he was pregnant with a lady's twins, and, they've been fighting over whether that's true or not. Well, her attorney has been sharing on a blog his thoughts and opinions, and since we cover all aspects of this trial, we're going to read what he had to say. I've been accused of only being one-sided in my reporting, but as you guys know, my audience, since we dated all the way back to, I believe, October, we've covered this case, I believe, with very sensitive gloves, and we've handled it, I believe, with great care. That being, we've shared just about every shred of evidence or lack thereof provided by this Jane Doe, and also evidence provided by Clayton, Greg, Matt, Mike, Sean, the contractor. It goes on and on and on, right? So follow me on Instagram if you want more content at DNeals. I'm also going to be here this afternoon on Bachelor Rush Hour, the podcast. I've got some very special interviews coming up that are going to be ruffling feathers, to say the least, on my podcast, Bachelor Rush Hour. They will be exclusively there. Those interviews being with former alumni, one of which I just recorded, and I'll be airing those when I'm in the hospital, as I'll be there, expected in a couple of weeks for my wife's and my delivery of our baby boy. So we'll have some content for you there while we're off, and I really think you're going to love it. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to share what Jane Doe's attorney had to say, and then we will share any other dissenting opinions or any corrections that need be made. What is interesting, and I'm not going to get into it here, he did call Clayton's supporters Clayton's crazy cult, but he said it with all K's instead of C's. Clayton, crazy, and cult are all words that in the English language are spelt with the C. He used the K, which leads to 3 Ks, which is, in my opinion, not an accident, but a weird shot. I don't know what it means, but I don't believe it's an accident to change the wording on that. He's free to explain himself if he wants to. And for other updates, I've yet to receive an apology for some of the messages about me and my colleagues that he posted, then dirty deleted. Again, no need to apologize if you don't, if you stand by what you said. But by deleting what you said, I'm guessing you don't stand by it. And if you don't stand by it, just apologize. Anyway, let's get into it. What does justice for Clayton look like? Let me tell you, ... This dated yesterday, April 16th. I'm sorry, is that 2 days ago? Oh, yeah, this is from Tuesday. Just getting it from David Gingras here. If you're following the Doe v. Eckerd case, you have probably seen a lot of folks talking about how they want to see justice for Clayton. There's a Justice for Clayton Twitter account. There's a Justice for Clayton GoFundMe page. I'm guessing Justice for Clayton t-shirts are next. He said, idea, Justice for Clayton condoms. Well, what would be funnier is if he said Justice for Clayton dental dams, which again would be better for oral sex, but condoms would be helpful if they did have sex, which he denies. And she has yet to really publicly say much about, but we will get into that. But what exactly does justice for Clayton look like? At the end of the day, all that happened here from a legal perspective is Jane Doe hooked up with a guy, Clayton, who she thought was interested in her. Sadly, it turned out the feelings were not mutual. Sucks, but that's life. Now, the issue I have here with words, and I know words are very important, and I'm sure lawyers will remind all of us words are very important, is that he says hooked up. So far, he's not saying they had sex. She claims that they were intimate. When Clayton said, hey, we only had oral, she redacted that part out, which was one of the most initial damning pieces of evidence for people to not believe her. Now, this evidence might not stand up in court, but it's still evidence that she didn't want the public to know his initial claims were that they just had oral sex, claims he has not wavered from. So I'm going to get back to this, but it's already really interesting because he claims that they hooked up, but her claims that were made were something far more sinister. 16 days ago, this was posted. Some of the deposition was shared, where there were allegations of the R word. SA is what we're calling it. You guys know what it stands for at this point. I don't say these because they get demonetized and sometimes shadow banned, and then less people get to see the content. So we have to sort of dance around the topic. Well, this is what she said in October. This is from an account that has been verified as her. She said, Clayton gave me a gummy when I got to his house, which he would admit. Not sure how that would make me baby trapping him. We consensually did stuff when we were both under the influence. So she says they consensually did stuff. And then, when we go down into the actual deposition, the claims that were made were far worse. Claims that you have a really hard time coming back from. How many men has she claimed to have had this done to her or conspired to have done this to her in the past? I've lost count. Of course, she emailed the judge in a previous case alleging that Greg Gillespie's lawyer, had conspired to do this very disgusting act, a very illegal act. Of course, the judge reported that and shared that with the attorney she was accusing because that's wild. So someone said faking pregnancies, faking the R word, faking being all these other things. Again, the rumors are that she's sort of faked grassroots support. We call it astroturfing, where you sort of fake support from other people or fake other accounts to further your agenda. That's what kind of grassrooting is. So she used this R word to avoid accountability for lying and scheming. Shows she truly feels she is uniquely entitled to get what she wants at any cost. That's what it really comes down to, is people feel as though she will do or say whatever she needs to do or say. Now, we have evidence from when she was living in San Francisco, where her and her mom essentially weaponized the San Francisco Police Department to win over a point. I can't get into that right now, but we have that evidence. And when I say we have that evidence, trust me when I say it is the type of evidence that shuts down any speculation. Okay? The type of evidence that I would be prepared to show in a court of law if I had to prove it, but don't want to out sources, that shows that her and her mom essentially lied to police's faces when it came down to wanting to paint a picture completely different from this scenario, but one that shows she's willing to rewrite stories to win. Now, we've been covering this eagle-eyed in order to help prevent stuff like that. But of course, there's the documents that you could scan through, which we've already shared, which was her in her deposition saying that Clayton put it in and that it wasn't with her consent. And of course, Woodnick said, so you're telling us that he did the, R word. And she said, well, that's what you want to call it. So that's where that stands. So now her lawyer seems to not be saying, obviously, if it was non-consensual, that would be different than the lawyer saying she hooked up with a guy. So words are very important. And depending on what sort of argument she's going to try to make in court, this is why it's probably dangerous to be speaking publicly, because these words could be used against you. So let's take off the sort of her claiming he came onto her in a non-consensual way. Let's wipe that off, because even though she claimed that, now we have multiple instances where we're calling it a hookup again, a consensual hookup. She claims she got pregnant, and she did exactly what you would expect. She tried to talk to Clayton about the situation. Yes, I know some people think she didn't handle this very well. That's fair, and I'm not judging your harsh opinions of Jane Doe. Of course, maybe you'd have a different view if you walked a mile in her shoes, as the saying goes. But here's the thing. This is a very strange twist of fate, but I have walked a mile in Clayton's shoes, literally. So then he's going to share a pregnancy allegation, which is very interesting that he's been there. What he's negating is all of the manipulation that went on early in the pregnancy, that Jane Doe kind of thought she might be pregnant super early on, and that she was so willing to take both pregnancy tests to test her HCG, but never follow through with any ultrasounds, that there was manipulating of evidence. All those other things he just conveniently doesn't discuss. So when he says, you might have a different view if you walked a mile in her shoes. Did walking a mile in her shoes walk us to the computer she used to doctor ultrasound evidence? Did walking a mile in her shoes walk her to the closet where there was a prosthetic belly being alleged because we saw her with a full belly where she would have been 2 months post miscarriage? Did walking in a mile in her shoes take us, where, like, I would love to walk a mile in her shoes. Did it take us to the horse jumping that she was doing when she would have had a high risk twins pregnancy? So I understand blogs, you can write as much as you want. So by leaving out some of these things, it's like, what are we even talking about? I'm sure the person who accused him of being pregnant, of knocking her up, won't involve all of this critical evidence of deception. So anyway, I'm going to share what he said. And by the way, I know it's been very contentious with some of the things that her attorney has written. I've got no problem with this guy. If I ran into him at an airport bar and I was waiting for a flight, I'd have a beer with him. He wouldn't have to compel me to do that. I got nothing against him. And to be quite honest, in some ways, I think he is, in some ways, slightly misread, because I do think he is trying to inject some humor into the situation. The only problem is that it's such a heavy situation, right? It's such a heavy conversation here of what has gone down, and it's really destroyed some people's lives. There's a lot of people in therapy because of all of this, right? So, but I do understand that he has tried to make jokes about, like, I defend First Amendment rights unless you're Dave Neal. Like, I take some of those as jokes. I'm just not necessarily in the audience right now to be laughing at them, because I'm on the receiving end of a considerable amount of threats, financially, through law and things like that. Legal threats. Just like Clayton this is from him. When I was in my mid-20s, I hooked up with a girl on spring break. Days later, she called and said those 2 words you just don't want to hear in that situation: I'm pregnant. Just like Clayton, my initial response was, wait a second, we only hooked up once, and that was like 6 days ago. How can you possibly know you're pregnant that soon? It sounded impossible, but she promised me it's possible. Unlike Clayton, my response was very different. I told this young lady, first and foremost, the decision about what to do was entirely up to her. I barely knew her, but I explained if I was the father, I would absolutely do the right thing and support her in any way necessary. As a man, even a young one, I just couldn't imagine turning my back on my own child, no matter what the circumstances were. Who would do this? It's not the child's fault that she came into this world unexpectedly. All right. First of all, Clayton claims they only had oral sex. So Clayton has been suspicious that she was ever pregnant in the first place. In your story, you had consensual sex. So there wasn't any doubt that you absolutely didn't knock her up. You're like, oh, shoot, maybe I did. And also, we don't see your text messages here, so we have to take your word for it that you were so graceful. It's a hell of a time, and I don't blame people that say, hey, get an abortion. I don't blame people that say that, like how people react to this news is really not something I'm terribly that I hold with such a high level, because people act in crazy ways when they get this type of news. So the girl decided to keep the baby. 9 months later, she called again and asked me to send a picture of my earlobe. To my shock and surprise, apparently there are 2 types of earlobes, attached and non-attached. And this is apparently a reliable way of determining paternity. If the child has an attached lobe and the mom does not, that means the father must have the same type as the kid, because genetics. No idea if that's true, but Google seems to think it's 100% accurate. This was 1996. Phones didn't have cameras. I probably mailed her a photo taken on film and dropped off at Walgreens. He said he probably mailed her a photo. This is where it's like, you don't remember what you did with the photo that proved whether or not you were the father. You would think that this would be so important you might remember it. But again, this was a while ago. Sometime later, I got the call. You don't have the right kind of earlobes. You can't be the dad. In the year 2024, maybe I would have responded differently. But in 1996, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I went off to law school in 1997 thinking I dodged a bullet. Little did I know, 10 years later, in 2006, that bullet would come back. I was sitting in my office on the 20th floor of an office building in Phoenix when the receptionist buzzed me. Yeah, David, there's someone here with some papers for you. Papers? By this time, I was a lawyer, and getting served with papers was hardly unusual, but not with my name listed as a respondent in a paternity establishment case. Okay, I'm interested. I later learned my spring break fling had some personal problems. I think she ended up applying for public health benefits for her child. When that happens, the state of Arizona asks, hey, why should Arizona taxpayers have to pay for this kid? Where's the father? Let's find him and make him pay. So this circumstance already from a mile away seems so much more reasonable. There's a real child, which means there'll be real genetics, which means he'll be able to prove whether he's the father or not. So nothing else really matters. The problem with Clayton's case is he can't prove a negative. He can't prove he was the father of a child he believes never existed. David continues, I later learned my spring break fling had some personal problems. We got that. So they asked the mom who the dad was, and my name was given. This resulted in the Arizona Attorney General filing a paternity action against me on behalf of the Department of Economic Security. The allegations in the petition shocked me. David is the father of this poor, desperate child. David has abandoned his child. David has refused to pay any support for his child. It was harsh to see those words in a legal filing, especially since A, the mom told me I was not the father, and B, no one from the AG's office contacted me about this before the case was filed in court. Isn't there any due diligence requirement? The papers included a summons with a court date. So I showed up in court without a lawyer. The judge, who I knew from other cases, asked me, so what do you want to do about this? That seemed like a strange question, but little did I know Arizona law actually allows people to voluntarily admit paternity even if they are not the biological parent of the child. It's kind of like adoption. Some people just want to be a parent to a child even if it's not your child. That's what the judge meant when he asked what I wanted to do. He was giving me the option of just saying, yeah, I'll be the parent of this kid even if I'm not actually her father. I'm a generous person, but I couldn't see taking responsibility for a child that wasn't mine, so I told the judge we should just take a test and see what happens. The AG had no objection, so we did a test, and guess what? The earlobe thing was 100% right. I was not the dad, at least for me. That was the end of that. By the way, this doesn't mean the earlobe thing is 100% right. It just means in your case, it worked out, but I understand. So I think Clayton would gladly take a genetic test if there were real children, and this would solve itself really easily. The problem that David is not addressing here is that the belief is that Jane Doe was running a con, that she had done this to multiple men before, that she knew they wouldn't be able to test because there were no babies. And as we called this out early on, she knew she'd claim miscarriage and there would be no paper trail past the HCG. If there was a paper trail, we would have seen it by now. They've refused all of that discovery, yada, yada, yada. He goes and continues. So yes, exactly like Clayton, maybe I was wrongfully sued for paternity. The Attorney General's allegations against me were 100% false. I did not abandon my child. I'm not a heartless deadbeat dad. But unlike Clayton, I didn't turn around and accuse the Arizona Attorney General's office of fraud. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't demand justice. By the way, Clayton has accused Jane Doe of fraud because she has admitted to fraud. She fraudulently altered medical documents in an effort to convince Clayton that smile was the place she received this ultrasound. We have yet to locate the actual origins of that ultrasound, so I don't think it's fair to say that it's an ultrasound of her actual baby. The AG's office made a good faith mistake. They relied on the best information available, and that information turned out to be wrong. Under the law, that does not mean I was automatically entitled to sanctions, which seems to be Clayton's attitude. The law never, ever requires people to be 100% perfect when they file a case in court. All that is required is a good faith basis to think your claims are probably true. If you can clear that super low hurdle, no judge will ever sanction you just because your claims later turn out to be wrong. Well, what we know now, and I hate to keep on contradicting him here, is that she claims the miscarriage was end of July. So the miscarriage happened now, as we're finding this out as she has moved the goalpost here, months before or at least before she filed the paternity claim, and kept that claim going as she went to the media with her story and did all these things to smear Clayton. Is that really a good faith basis to think your claims are true? It seems as though David's side, representing Jane Doe, and the Justice for Clayton side disagree with this, which will be probably what the judge rules on. So time will tell. That's not a bad thing. In the old days, when people had disputes, they'd challenge you to a duel with pistols on Main Street at high noon. 50 paces, turn and fire. That's how disputes were resolved. It was messy, loud, and probably not fair, but it was fast and cheap. Today, we have a more civilized legal system to help people solve their disputes. We want to encourage people to come to court rather than using violence or other means to solve a dispute. And as part of that, we know that sometimes people will bring claims that turn out to be wrong. That's why I am so confused at the angry Justice for Clayton fans who explain most of us are primarily interested in how to make sure this does not happen to any more men. False accusations help none of us. Yeah, okay, that's true. But in the world of false accusations, a mistaken, even groundless allegation of paternity is one of the easiest, quickest, and cheapest to disprove. It's like like shooting someone with a Nerf dart. Any collateral damage is virtually zero. Seriously, I know because it happened to me. What didn't happen to you, though, is an article was written in The Sun before the child was even born. The child never, the miscarriage is never proven. And without a proof of a miscarriage and without any proof of birth after HCG tests, there's no way to test that he wasn't the one. It becomes a he said, she said, which obviously Jane Doe knew was going to happen because this has happened before. She claims, I think she's been pregnant 4 times now, and it's fair to think that if this was a lie and there's evidence that others were a lie, that they are all a lie. You know, Jane Doe comes from an affluent family. You know, her dad gets medical care of the highest levels for his, disease. We wish him the best. But how come all of her medical evidence is like a random neurology appointment, a random appointment made with somebody she never went to go see? She sought treatment but didn't receive it. She's so willing to drive from Arizona to California to get a pill but has no evidence she ever went to Planned Parenthood, at least evidence that she ever got an ultrasound. So where is all that evidence? For someone that, is so affluent, where is the evidence of a primary care provider in the weeks and months she would have been pregnant? I mean, if David wasn't representing Jane Doe here, I 100% believe he would be on our side of critical thinking. But, he's got checks to cash and he's got his blog to write and he's hoping to get his client off. Let's assume for a second that Jane was never pregnant, or maybe she was pregnant and Clayton wasn't the father, or maybe Clayton was the father, but Jane unknowingly had a very early miscarriage, which would explain a lot of the later events we've seen. In any of those situations, is it really that big a deal? I just don't see it that way. The only person making it a big deal is you-know-who and his legal team. Cough, cough. Any amount of deal that Clayton is making this is a result of the torment he has faced. It's a result of Jane Doe writing to his boss, his bosses, people that were hiring him for speaking engagements saying, do you really want to have a speaking engagement with a mental health speaker who's doing this to me? So she claims in her deposition that she had hand-sized fetal sacs. David says she never said that, but she I guess showed them. We'll have to see what the video says, that they were the size of her hands. And then she claims she miscarried in July. The fetal sacs in July wouldn't have looked really any different than someone having their period. It wouldn't have looked any different or very minimally different to a non-expert. So for that, you go, which one is it? Her story, it's hard to argue it because it's all over the place. If Clayton wanted justice, all he had to do was exactly what I did. Just take a very simple test and let the results speak for themselves. Clayton did take a paternity test. 3 of the 4 results came back little to no fetal DNA. So he shared his DNA with a third party, Ravgen, shout out to Brett, I believe in Baltimore. And then her blood test showed there's no baby to test the paternity against. They knew Clayton's DNA would be different than Jane Doe's DNA. They had both versions of DNA. What they couldn't find was DNA that would have been a baby's that would have led to Clayton being the father. So to say all he had to do was take a simple test, that's all he did have to do, and that's exactly what he did do. He cooperated every step of the way. If Jane was lying, there was never any chance that Clayton could ever fail that test. This should have taken about 5 minutes of his time, and the total legal fees would be 0, and Jane would have lost, and Clayton would have his justice, whatever that means. That's why I just don't understand this anti-Jane Doe mob mentality. Personally, I think when this all comes out in court, people are going to realize they were completely wrong about Jane Doe, like completely. But even if I'm wrong and Jane Doe has lied about everything, so freaking what? I personally have a judgment that proves beyond any doubt that Arizona Attorney General brought a false paternity claim against me, which took literally 5 minutes of my time and exactly $0 to disprove. It was over so fast. All I lost was maybe 1 hour of my time. So my response to that is, just because the Attorney General brought a false paternity claim against him, there was no evidence to prove before they did the claim whether or not he was the father or not. There is boatloads of evidence that prove Clayton was never the father and that she was never pregnant. So I reject wholeheartedly the arguments he's making here. I can't go a paragraph without saying, no, that's not true. And again, I'm not an expert. I'm not a genius. My IQ is not that high. I'm a normal person covering this on the day-to-day. I just reject a lot of these arguments. But hey, He's not litigating this against me. We'll see how it plays out in court. That's just my opinion. He said, I got my justice in the end, and I'm fine with how it turned out. So when I look at what Clayton is doing in this case, all I can do is shake my head and wonder what on earth this kid is thinking. I'll read some of the comments from another person. This is such a bad take. Clayton tried to get Jane Doe to take a paternity test. She refused until a court ordered it. Then the results came back 3 times, little to no fetal DNA because Jane was never pregnant. So Clayton couldn't just simply take a paternity test, not to mention Jane alleges miscarriage before she filed the suit, then continued to defame Clayton, go to the media, write articles, gave pics of fake pregnancy bombs, etc. This article is ridiculous. David's response, my understanding of the facts is that you have this all wrong, but let's wait to see what comes out at trial. So David doesn't address the little to no fetal DNA. It'll be interesting to see how he argues that point in court. Another person responded, it seems like either you haven't read up on what happened prior to you joining the case or your client is continuing her lies, maybe both. And again, his response is only, what am I missing? So maybe he's fishing for new information so he knows how to properly defend this the way he did on Twitter, which not a terrible technique as long as you have the permission of your client. I'm assuming Jane Doe's giving him this permission. Why would he be doing this if not? It's kind of like a fishing expedition. He makes a lot of these like claims and then he's waiting for people to fight them. And then he knows rather than wait to get stumped by Woodnick Law in court, he can, deal with people right now. So I think the best thing is to not engage with him. But I do understand that we're doing just that. We're going, no, this can't be true. But you know what? I'm all about truth. So I'd rather educate on what I believe to be the truth right now. And maybe his ears will open widely. David said, I'm only blogging, tweeting about selective issues. I wish I could share everything right now, but that's not appropriate. And try to remember, there are vloggers who are literally doing videos about this case almost every day. And their coverage is insanely one-sided. So yes, as much as I'd prefer not to be fighting against the disinformation campaigns, I don't really have a choice. Tell Clayton's army to stop talking until the trial, and you won't hear a peep from me until then. So, of course, David is a First Amendment rights sort of advocate. And I know what he's saying. I won't talk if they don't talk, but he knows we have the right to talk and discuss this case. I'm doing David a benefit by reading his blog right now. I have yet one time to not share information that would be pro Jane Doe. We've shared, and you can watch the 100 or so videos, every side of this story. And then I offer my opinion. Oh, here's what happened with O.J. Simpson. The glove didn't fit. What's my opinion? Well, I kind of feel like he got away with murder. That's my opinion based on the evidence I saw. Johnny Depp v. Amber Heard. I went into that court case thinking there's no way he's going to win a defamation suit against her. It's very hard to win these. And then as we watched her change her stories and the different experts, they go, you know what? It seems like he's got a case. She's not as credible as she could be and therefore is making this very difficult. Based on hard evidence we listen to, phone calls, this and that. So you get the evidence, then you make your opinion. So while he might think, oh, it's so one-sided, I think a little benefit has to go to everyone who tried to remain objective, tried to see all sides of this story. Anyway, let's continue. And by the way, he says we're doing this every day. Yeah, this is one of, I usually make about 5 pieces of content a day. Maybe one of them is this. I, again, cover a whole bunch of other things. But that's how it works. When there's a story in the news, we'll cover it on every angle possible as we have an audience consuming all of that content. Jason said, why don't the two of them just have a duel? Seems like that worked out better in the past. Kind of seems weird blogging about your client, though. I do wonder if when you found out your spring break fling was pregnant, was it mentioned online, brought to the press, or you were apparently outed to the world? I assume this since you walked in his shoes. I guess you're all right. We will all see the ultrasound in a couple of months. Miscarriage in July, filed in family court in August, had a belly in October and November, claims in emails that she was 100% pregnant in December. I don't know about you, but that just doesn't add up to me. Someone said, shush, stop talking now. We've all got secondhand embarrassment for you. I wonder how many future clients will avoid you like the plague. It seems irresponsible for a lawyer to be blogging about a current case. By the way, if Jane Doe is cool with it, we're cool with it, whatever. If she's not cool with it, she would have told him to stop. It also seems that you are not bothered about your client being a big fat liar. Yes, I'm saying she lied, so maybe you are perfect for each other. Your telling of her story has equally as many holes and discrepancies. Such a complete waste of judicial resources, but I'm sure you are getting plenty of those sweet dollars to line your pockets while insulting and demeaning the public. Oh, nearly forgot. Excellent news that another pregnancy faker is going to jail for 16 years. There's still hope that liar Jane Doe will finally be held accountable for her disgusting, dare I say, criminal actions. False accusations should be criminal. All the best. Someone said, I don't understand the post. It's like you know nothing about this case. Clayton has already taken 3 DNA tests. So David says that's actually not what the DNA tests show, but if you think that, it's fine. I'd be interested to see what the DNA tests show. Will he be arguing that little to no DNA doesn't mean no DNA? Will that be the argument? Again, we'll have to see how it all plays out, but I'm interested that he's finally responding to say that's not what the DNA tests show. Why does he care so much right now to argue this? Won't he be arguing this in court? Claire said, when you first entered your appearance, your position was, if I find out she's lying, I'll drop her like a hot potato. Now your position is, so what if she's lying? I understand your duty to represent your client, but this is just perpetuating fraud. Do you realize you have 3 different timelines regarding the alleged miscarriage? Clayton already appeared before the real estate board regarding your client's allegations. They cleared him. That detail may undermine your client's claims against him in that regard. Someone said, I'm a lawyer and you're an embarrassment to the profession. I don't have time to explain why, but there is nothing analogous between your paternity story and Clayton's. Jane has told so many lies about so many men, one can't keep track. She has manipulated and victimized him relentlessly. You took 1 test and never heard from the woman again. And oh yeah, she was actually pregnant and you had intercourse. JJ said, Jane, if you're reading this, what you are doing is emotional extortion. I'm sorry for whatever happened in your past to get you to this place. It had to have been so traumatic. It's time to right the wrongs and start healing. You deserve a full and loving life and are capable of having that. This mess can eventually become the wound that broke the toxic patterns and set you free to build a life with emotional security and self-worth. I'm sure this is all really scary. I can't imagine the pressure you feel and how much you want the world to see your worth. There is freedom and strength and truth. You're intelligent, beautiful, talented, and capable of having a life without all this chaos. What a beautiful comment. How nice of people to have such grace. David's response, I don't think Jane reads this page on a regular basis, but I forwarded your comments to her. Oh, how nice. Anonymous said, I'm probably a minority in that I'm following this case, but not necessarily part of the JFC crew. I don't think it's fair to make assumptions until new evidence is seen, though I admit all evidence out there really supports Clayton's side. I agree it's reasonable to assume she did think she was pregnant or even was early on. Heck, Clayton believed it enough to take a test. I'm sure if you really did nothing that was even at risk of getting someone pregnant, you wouldn't bat an eye. But here's where I think the difference is that makes everyone mad. She didn't just miscarry and then move on. She faked ultrasounds, which she admitted. And while she hasn't admitted to it, I think it's obvious that she faked an ongoing pregnancy while knowing she wasn't pregnant, showing up to court in November with a bump. Now, whether all of that stuff is related enough to get her trouble in court, I don't know. I'm not involved in law enough, but I think that's at least the basis of everyone being so angry. In my personal opinion, I really do think she was pregnant or reasonable, though she was pregnant in the beginning. But I think she learned that she wasn't very early on, and instead of admitting that she continued to fake the pregnancy. That is the part that upsets me personally, as a woman who has had struggles getting pregnant and miscarrying before. So this person's allowed their opinion. It's the most generous so far of Jane Doe that she really thought she was pregnant. I disagree with this because Clayton claims they only had oral and she says they were just sexually intimate. She never claims that anything happened. And the idea that there was something down there when they were talking, that seems to me to be a front. The more we look into it and see that she wanted a dating contract and she wanted him to then have sex with her again because she was already pregnant, the more we looked into that, the more I see that as a trap. That's my opinion. So this person's allowed to share their opinion. I don't believe she ever thought she was pregnant. I believe she knew she was going to test positive for pregnancy. I believe that. Ivy said, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but surely as a lawyer with presumably above average analytical ability, can you not see that this is a completely apples to oranges comparison? And by the way, this idea about her faking the ultrasounds, he does not comment on that. He's not willing to take a point on whether she faked them or not. He's basically saying, so what? And calling him out to say, hey, you said you'd drop her if she lied. Now you're saying, so what if she lied? It's clear to, I think it's fair, it's a fair call out. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but surely as a lawyer with presumable above average analytical ability, can you not see that this is a completely apples to oranges comparison? What you're talking about is standard garden variety Jerry Springer paternity determination that's been done a million times. Jane's entire saga is so far beyond normal, she's on another criminal planet. To name one big difference, I assume you had sex with this individual. Friendly reminder that this is how pregnancies happen. Literally, everyone who's older than 9th grade knows that you can't get pregnant for being in external proximity to semen. So she could start by explaining this conundrum. I look forward to all these records that will completely blow our minds and make us take back everything. She has been promising this for months. Why would she sit on all this exculpatory evidence for months? I hope it's better than the big 102 HCG reveal. Also, I second everything JJ said above. Jane, get some help. I agree. I've said this all along. If evidence comes out that changes my mind on this, I'm happy to say, with new evidence, I'm changing my opinion. I live in a world where I do change my opinion based on new evidence. Ashley said, "Hi, David. I'm wondering what your take is on the 500 plus emails that Jane sent to Clayton begging him to be in a relationship with her, all prior to filing the paternity case. She threatened to trash him on Reddit, magazines, social media, and involve the court system if he refused to give her a chance. Do you think this is appropriate legal behavior? Does this not fall under blackmail, fraud, or extortion? And what about her email to Clayton's lawyer where she threatened to sue him for $1.4 million? Will you be able to justify all that in court, or do you feel none of that is relevant?" These are great questions. He said, "So weirdly, I don't actually have the 500 plus emails you're talking about. It's technical, but I don't think they are relevant to this part of the case, the paternity part. Those might be relevant to the harassment side of the case, but I'm not involved in that part yet. I just appeared for Jane in harassment side of things, and I'll get to that when I can. But let me answer this question. And what about her email to Clayton's lawyer where she threatened to sue him for over $1 million? Do you know what actually happened with that issue? When Jane first met Clayton, she wanted to help him look for investment properties." Okay, so it goes on and on. We already litigated this. The real estate board basically said Clayton's not going to be charged or lose his license or anything like that. So literally 4 days. So this is a lot here. That was literally 4 days after they first hooked up and before Jane said anything to Clayton about being pregnant. Rather than submitting Jane's offer to the property sellers, Clayton threw them in the trash. He never submitted them, and then he lied to her about this twice. When asked to explain his actions, Clayton offered this lame excuse. "Well, yeah, I didn't think she was serious about those offers. You may not know this, but when Jane submitted those offers, which would have been legally binding our agreements if they had been accepted, Jane attached a copy of her recent bank statement that showed she had nearly $450,000 in cash in her checking account." By the way, that's insane. If she does, why would you have that much money in your checking account? I mean, maybe it's a high yield checking or savings account, but that's just wild. Who has that much cash? "I don't know about you, but that certainly makes it look like she was serious about going through with those offers. And here's the other weird thing. By lying to Jane about the offers, Clayton put himself at serious risk of personal liability. First of all, when she sued him for $1.36 million, she wouldn't have her equity wouldn't have been that high in the offers. It's a whole side conversation. But of course, Gingras responds to this, but not the other part about like the damning, contracts to date her before she weaponized her responses. He said, "I guess you can criticize Jane for sending too many emails to Clayton, but if you stand back and look at who lied first, the answer is Clayton. And who engaged in illegal, inappropriate conduct first? That was Clayton." Now, of course, at this point, Clayton had said, "Stop contacting me. I don't want to get the police involved." Someone said, "You are a lawyer? If so, I find it odd that you state I have walked a mile in Clayton's shoes." Literally. I'm no genius, but I'm fairly certain you have not literally walked in Clayton's shoes. That's a very dumb thing to say, but I will give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe at some point you did have a pair of his shoes and walk a mile in them. Okay, so more of a technical response. There it is, folks. Interesting stuff we're learning. Jane Doe had $450,000 in her bank account. Maybe she was willing to buy these homes, but she also was, that whole real estate side of things would have to be litigated in the court because, first of all we know is what went down with the real estate board, which is that I don't think they personally went through with any claims against Clayton. I think he tried to shuffle her off to somebody else. But no surprise, though, that one of the ways in which she tries to, convince Clayton to talk to her is by having this sort of financial relationship. And she used that financial relationship to say, "All right, let's put an offer in. You're going to make a couple $100,000 on this, blah, blah, blah." Like she was, in my opinion, stringing him along with a commission. What was her motive? I have no idea. Let me know what you guys think. I think some of those responses to Gingras were really interesting. I think Gingras left a lot of meat on the bone in his blog, and I hope Gingras doesn't mind if we cover this story every day. Will you give me permission? Is that okay? Again, I don't necessarily see him as a bad guy. I just see him as a strategy that is be a bull in a china shop, come in, kick the door down swinging, try to, find holes in these arguments as the new guy, and try to get this thing to settle before it goes to trial. I don't see that happening, and I don't see the judge agreeing with her side. But we're going to be here every day to report it. Don't think when the verdict comes and all that we're not going to report it. Don't think if you provide evidence that she was pregnant in this large paper trail of, going to get an ultrasound every 2 weeks as you do when you're early on in a pregnancy. Don't think that if you have that information, we're not going to share it. We are here to share it all. You can continue to blog. We'll continue as long as it's got merit and it's not dirty hardball where you say that you want to read my obituary and throw it in the trash and you call me pond scum and all these things. As long as that's not what you're doing, we are happy to share information regarding this case as it comes out. So continue to blog all you want. We'll continue to make videos about it. All right, folks, have a good one. I'll be live on Patreon right after this, and I mean right after this, at the 1 p.m. Central Standard Time hour. Go check me over there, and we'll see you later. Bye, everybody.